Year 8 English video on Chapter 16 of the novel Once. It starts off, once I went on my first train journey. I'd call it painful and miserable. This is how Felix views the train journey. Obviously, it's not a normal train journey. They are shoved 100 to 120 people in a box cart. There's no room to move. It's hot. People are thirsty. There's nowhere to go to the toilet. It's a long train ride to the death camps. It is very much painful and miserable. This chapter completely takes place in the boxcar on the way to the death camp. There are many different death camps that the Nazis have. One of the most famous is Dachau, but that's in southern Germany. Most of the death camps and concentration camps were located in Poland, German-occupied Poland. We've spoken about this before. Of all of the camps, the death camps were a rare breed. Most camps were concentration camps and forced labour camps where the Jews would be incarcerated or imprisoned and they'd be forced to work. Terrible conditions meant many dropped dead and many were killed. However, the difference between a concentration camp or a forced labour camp and a death camp is that the death camps were set up on an industrial scale to kill Jews. So they're set up with the purpose of killing. Not to make them work, not to imprison them, but to slaughter them in huge numbers, thousands every day. There were 4 main death camps in Poland. The most famous is probably Auschwitz. Auschwitz and Birkenau. 1.1 million Jews were slaughtered in Auschwitz. Now, Auschwitz is a little bit different to the other ones because Auschwitz is a forced labour camp. And we call it Auschwitz-Birkenau because Birkenau was kind of Auschwitz too. And that was set up as a death camp. Zyklon B was the gas of choice of the Nazis and they were slaughtered, gassing to death 1 million Jewish men, women and children. At Treblinka in Poland, this was set up as a death camp exclusively to kill Jews. Between 800,000 and 900,000, just shy of 1 million Jews were slaughtered at Treblinka. If this story is based in Warsaw, then Treblinka would be the death camp which Felix is on the way to. If this is in Krakow, Auschwitz-Birkenau would be a death camp in which Felix is on his way to. There were 2 others. Bujec, 600,000 Jews were killed, and Sobibor, 200,000 Jews were killed there. These places still exist today as museums to remember what happens. If you ever get a chance to go to Poland, a trip to Auschwitz or a trip to Treblinka will be well worthwhile in learning and understanding this period of history. So when it comes to the characters in this chapter, chapter 16, we have a focus again on Felix and how generous, kind and compassionate he is. The issue in this chapter is around the toilet in the boxcar. There is no toilet. It's the horror also that we can see here on page 142, the 2 words that Barney once used, death camp. There's a strong sense of reality around this and a strong sense of inevitability. They are on a train to a death camp. There's not much hope, really. Despite the hopelessness of the situation, you find Felix thinking very differently. Having no toilet paper isn't so bad when you're young and you've lived in an orphanage a long way from the shops and you're used to sometimes just letting poo dry on you and then getting on with things. But for older people who are used to tradition, it must be awful. So he has a real compassionate heart when he sees this woman push through to the corner of the boxcar to go to the toilet. People turn away. And he thinks at that time how awful it must be for her. So he's not thinking about himself. He's not thinking about the inevitability of death at the death camp. Instead, he's thinking about the indignity that this older woman faces. And to allay this indignity, he reaches into his shirt, pulls out blank pages from his notebook and gives it to the woman. We have compassion, kindness and a real awareness of the needs of other people in Felix. On page 144, it gets to the point where he rips the rest of the pages out of his notebooks and wriggles past everyone to the toilet corner. Barney's very proud of him. Barney squeezes his arm and says, "Well done, Felix." And he rips the rest of the pages out, which includes his stories and his thoughts about his mum and dad, everything that was precious to him in this precious notebook given to him by his parents who are gone. He rips the rest out and he goes to put them on a bolt for everyone to use. So we can really see generosity, a spirit of generosity, kindness and compassion in Felix. We also see on page 147 his love for Barney. His love for Barney on page 147, now I've got my arms around him, I don't ever want to let go. So although he was angry with Barney in the past, he's turned around and he recognises from Barney's generosity to him and love of him how much Barney means to him. So when it comes time to jump from the train, we find that only two say yes. So in looking at literary features in chapter 16 of Once, let's have a look at something we've seen before. On page 143, we see Felix talking to his imagination. Please, I beg my imagination, give me something else to think about. Notice how your imagination can't be begged. It can't be pleaded or negotiated with. Your imagination is just your imagination. Give me something else to think about. Imagination can't give anything. These are the characteristics of a person. So he's anthropomorphizing his imagination. He's making it into a person, personification. On page 146, we have repetition in use. I don't want to, says Ruth. I don't want to, says Jacob. I don't want to, says Henry. And I don't want to, says Yannick. 4 times in a row, I don't want to. I want to, says a voice, and it's Zelda. So 4 times I don't want to, that repetition hits home the point, and then we have a juxtaposition here between I don't want to and I want to, and it becomes all the more clear because of the repetition. So the devices that are using a repetition of the same phrase over and over 4 times in a row, and then juxtaposing those other children's views with Zelda's view of I want to. So we have a juxtaposition through repetition. So in the lead up to the jump from the train, we have some short sentences here. We can see truncated sentences. The rest of the kids shake their head. And Barney, a truncated sentence. But I have to. Yes, says Barney. Thank you, I say. His eyes are wet as mine. These short sentence here build up the tension again until they jump off the train. And those are the literary devices that are used in chapter 16. Of course, we can speak about themes. In the horror of that boxcar, where it's hot, difficult to move, crowded, overcrowded, there's no sense of personal dignity. You have to go to the toilet in the corner of a boxcar. It's unsafe. It's a long journey. It's loud and completely undignified. In the midst of that, we find kindness. So while it's easy for people to go and think of themselves above all others, Felix demonstrates kindness amidst the horror. He self-sacrifices. He gives of his precious book, that is his treasured possession given to him by his parents, ripping pages out so people can have dignity amidst this horrific situation. And lastly, to jump off the train with Zelda in one hand and Chaya in the other demonstrates courage. So the 3 themes we have is kindness amidst the horror of the Holocaust, self-sacrifice, and courage.